Spiders. Why does it always have to be spiders? Truly, spiders are a bit of a strange thing to humans. While we are physically larger and more capable than a spider, our brains recognize that a spider is a pretty fantastic hunter. Maybe it's because we know that if they were, say, the size of a small dog, they'd be a legitimate threat, and that's why we kind of tend to abhor them. Or maybe it's because when we were living in caves, I don't know, if you get bitten by one, those things like could take you out. There are few things that draw as much human ire and disgust quite like a spider does. But there is in fact one thing that does, which is, as we all know, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, it's the horrific looking anglerfish. Like, these things are terrible. Alright, editor, pull up a few images of these just so we can look. Look, some people think this is a shtick. I really do despise anglerfish in all of its forms. I don't know what it is, but them being in the water somewhere in the world when like I'm in the ocean, it just disgusts me. It's not that I want them to be extinct, I just want them not to be alive on this planet anymore. Hashtag nuke the Mariana Trench. Anyhow, where was I? Okay, yes. So with spiders, because of the threats they pose in general being typically venomous, there is only really one kind of good spider, and that's a dead spider, or I guess there's really two good types of spiders, and that's a falcidae, which I think that's how you pronounce it, but it's more colloquially known as a daddy long legs, second only to the much better mommy wide thighs. Remind me to never say anything like that again. In the events of Sting, an alien race of spiders would touch down, and as a result, its growth pattern, ability to attack, and mimicry were beyond anything that has ever evolved on Earth. But how did this species survive? Why is its body structure so similar to spiders on Earth? And how does it grow the way that it does? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode, along with many other things. Hey guys, so my new merchandise is finally launching for Halloween, like this shirt right here, which is pretty sweet, and a coffee mug, of course. And also this shirt. Wow, would you look at that? Amazing. Also, that's me squatting with a coffee cup and a shirt. And then that is Professor Furface, and I have hoodies. So if you would like to support the channel, check out roanokemerch.com. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Without you, this channel would really be nothing, and I would just be screaming into the void about anglerfish being horrible creatures. If you enjoy these types of videos, then check out the Discord as we do movie nights, and pretty much everything over there, is cool. Also, come watch Roanoke Games. For real, it's getting better. It's where I game, and the name gaming is actually in there, so it's gaming. How meta. Links for both in the description. So we kick off our story to radio frequencies tuning because that's how it has to be. I don't make the rules, I just work here. The Weather Service is issuing a warning for an ice storm due to an asteroid cluster that passed by Earth the previous day. Say what now, Vegeta? As we see some yarn, a woman is furiously knitting because of the asteroid cluster that passed yesterday, as the TV plays softly because, wouldn't you know it, the asteroid cluster. Okay, that joke is already lame. Something begins growling in the corner as the noises are coming from inside the wall. I'm not trapped in my home with you in my walls. You're trapped in my walls with my home with me trapped in my walls. Okay, it works out. She goes to the phone book and begins calling someone as we hear screeching. She called Frank then she says her name is Helga. It appears as though she cannot remember who she is, which is kind of a bummer. He remembers her and then heads back to go take care of the issue. Outside, the ice storm is quite literally ice due to the asteroids that evidently passed by. So, are they suggesting that the ice came from the asteroids and then it caused the temperature to tank, or the storm just happened to show up? I don't know. They're kind of making a vague connection between the ice storm and the asteroid. I don't know. You know what? I'm not letting this go. I need to look into this.
1 hour later.
Okay, so after looking into it, while asteroids can affect the weather in the form of producing heat, that's because they would typically be striking the planet. The other suggestion is maybe that the dust from the asteroid can cloud the upper atmosphere, decreasing the amount of heat that gets in, or at least like sunlight, which I suppose could have intensified an already present ice storm. Weird either way. Anyhow, Frank shows up and then gets let in by the woman. Climbing up the stairs, he hears something in the vent and then sees green fluid leaking out. Well, that's not good. Sniffing the strange green fluid, that cannot be good for your health, as Frank then tells her about the Bug Brothers were just in prison. Okay, Helga has completely forgotten why she called him there, as then they hear something in the walls. As Frank and Helga head in, they hear a noise behind them as Frank then heads over to check it out. Opening the door, well, this isn't creepy. Seeing blood in a hard hat, Bug Brothers aren't doing so hot. Continuing to hear something in there, let me tell you how fast I would be leaving the premises. Looking in, a man is bleeding out as Frank gets attacked next. Seeing Helga, he gets pulled in as strangely the door then shuts behind him as Helga forgets what she was even doing. Alzheimer's can do that from time to time. Actually, it literally does that every time. Frank gets pulled in the vent next as she can hear someone. Concerned about the noise, she then calls the next exterminator. So now it's 4 days earlier. One of the meteors graduates and becomes a meteorite because it had the right stuff to make it to the ground, as an egg releases a spider. Why do I keep doing this to myself? I hate spiders. See, in the immortalized words of Damon Baird, as usual, humans are hardwired to react to things that scuttle, and brother, my wiring works perfectly. Then we get the intro card, Sting. Looking at a vent, a youngling then breaks into Annabelle Origin's room as we see a hole in the window. Taking a picture of a doll, Spider then crawls out under her hand, making a noise at her in the same way that her phone just chirped. Interesting mimicry. She then puts it in a box and then crawls back to the vent as the woman comes back in and sees a hole in the window and then the dollhouse. The girl makes her escape through the vents, necromorph style, seeing Helga knitting and a cat straight vibing with a parrot squawking. Continuing through the vents, she then creeps on everyone's apartment with one guy flashing his fish. Gunter then is complaining about the girl with a window that's double padlocked. And as we will find out, Gunter's kind of just a straight up jerk. Ah, German women. Lovely creatures. You gotta watch out for that flavor of woman experience shows. So Charlotte keeps making her way to her room as she closes the vent and then puts the spider in a jar. It begins squeaking at her, which spiders are famously known to do so, I guess. It also begins tapping on the glass. Well, that is a little strange. Obviously, this would put the spider at a higher level of intelligence even with this one act, which will actually hint at a lot of things about it concerning its physiological makeup and its own biochemistry. There's actually a lot of interesting anatomical traits with this creature that could only exist because it acts as such. So now we meet Ethan. This guy quite literally is just trying to help provide for his blended family, working 2 jobs, and gets crapped on by literally everyone in this movie. It is wild. He then shows up to talk to Charlotte. He asks her if she was in her grandmother's apartment, and Charlotte spills the beans by accident, indicating that she was in the room by saying that she was just looking at the dollhouse, which how would she have known about the dollhouse? Taking pictures of the spider, she calls it Sting as she posts it on social media. Charlotte gets put on babysitting duty and has the usual preteen annoyance about it. We've all been there at one point in time. My personal flavor, I don't know why I would do this, I would just shrug my shoulders. I remember when my dad asked me one time, he's like, can you do anything besides shrug your shoulders? And then I shrugged and I was like, this is really becoming a problem. So back at the spider, it watches her creating what you could probably call art because it's better than anything I can do. And seeing a cockroach, the spider needs to eat. It then chirps at her to let her know that it's hungry, just like her phone. And then she dumps the roach in. As she looks away, the cockroach and spider are gone as it's stuck onto the lid of the jar. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ethan is working on a sink at Maria's apartment as a cockroach drops on his face. Maria then comes over to talk to him about how lucky he is to have a family like that. And I imagine based on what we're seeing with the picture of her family, it's kind of heavily implied that she lost one of her offspring, which maybe led to a split up of her and her husband and then her losing her other offspring. Not totally sure as it's never really fully explained. But anyhow, they then hear a thud and a baby crying. Hearing the spider make a tweet noise, all I can say is at least it's not the Alabama barking spiders. Probably like 5 people got that joke. She then connects Sting is hungry when he makes that noise, so then she feeds it more cockroaches. So down in a dingy, wet basement for some reason, Ethan starts working on a boiler as he gets it running. Taking the trash out to, I guess, Silent Hill 2, the trash compactor then stalls. Coincidentally, I will be playing Silent Hill 2 pretty soon here, so come join me on Roanoke Games. Again, the channel's taken off somewhat, and it's been pretty fun thus far, so, you know, the more support on it, the more we keep going, I don't know. So trying again, it then works the second time as it compacts the trash. Wonder why they showed us that. Heading back upstairs, he gets mentally ready at the door. As he opens the door, his wife then hands him the baby, while she goes running upstairs to put her mom to bed. And that's the interesting part about having offspring. One parent might be home all day with them while the other is working. Both, I feel like, would need a break when the other gets home, but you can't really get that break. It's kind of like, you're both exhausted, but you just gotta keep going. So she puts Helga to bed as she is told she made a sweater for Charlotte, and then grabbing the sweater, it stinks of mothballs. Okay, so we'll run it through a washer. So apparently, we have an ice thunderstorm now as Charlotte looks at a comic book she made with her stepdad having illustrated it. Breaking his pencil, Charlotte then comes down and hands him the sharpener, and he tells her about how her comic book could probably go mainstream. So then Charlotte draws eyes on the guy because it's supposed to represent her dad, like her real dad, as in the mom kind of breaks up the moment. She's like, wow, that was a nice moment. I needed that. Like, okay, creepy McCreepster. Also, again, nice job interrupting that bonding moment, which for real, I hate to be this guy, I don't like Heather. And there is plenty of good reasons of why I don't. And I tried to fix it after the fact, after I wrote this, but I didn't really highlight it. So basically she interrupts bonding moments between step parent and step offspring, saying she needed that. Later, she doesn't step in when the offspring is going absolutely ham on the stepdad for telling her the truth about her own father, then gets angry at him for telling the truth. And in general, Heather is just mega self-absorbed. I wouldn't say she's a full-blown Amy, but she definitely is living on the same street as Amy. And if you have no idea why I have extreme dislikes for Amy's in general, go watch my The Ruins episode. I think it's the selfishness I dislike the most, and then like the pearl clutching when someone calls them on their nonsense. Alright, so let me climb off this soapbox real quick. So as I sit for dinner and drink wine and talk about stuff, the tense music continues to rise as the spider is spidering, menacingly. So later that night, as the mom tends to the baby, Ethan is knocking back some beers working, which beers and wine in the same night, you mad lad. It's a horrible hangover waiting to happen. Follow me for more obvious observations. So then he erases the eyes that she drew in the professor, which again, that's based on her father, which again, her dad is a total chode. He then goes to check on Charlotte after hearing a noise. Looking down, he spots a spider sketch and he tells her that her sketches are really good as he's gonna just steal the spider idea, which it's a joke that he says that. Which I do like how this movie actually humanizes a family pretty well concerning interactions instead of just making it like mega cringe, which is, it's nicely done. Except for Hethamy over here, she is massive cringe. So Charlotte asks if he's been drinking. He's like, yeah, wine and beer. As Charlotte asks if he actually erased the pencil changes. And then she's like, don't pretend to like my ideas if you don't like them. Jesus, that was rough. So as everyone heads to bed, the spider continues being a spider, and it can now open jar lids. Having grown considerably, it then heads into the vents and begins looking for some more meals. The parrot is the first to notice, and so it'll be the first victim. So at this point, we are beginning to hit the upper limitations of spider growth, and this is for several reasons. While there are spiders that can grow a little larger than this, and interestingly actually do have the ability to hunt birds, like the bird-eating tarantula known as the Goliath bird eater, the reason they cannot grow much larger past this sort of size is an oxygen saturation issue. See, way back in the day, the Earth used to have giant insects during the Carboniferous period. At the beginning, oxygen levels were actually around roughly 20% of the atmosphere, which is comparable to today's levels, which I think we sit like somewhere between 21% to like 23%. However, as time progressed, 50 million years would pass, which would lead to oxygen levels to rise during that time, and they got as high as 35%. During this time frame, insects would increase in size, and also forest fires would just ignite for literally no reason. So the reason for most of this is that insects have kind of a limitation based on two factors. Their body shape is the first limitation, and oxygen perfusion is the second. Due to their open circulatory system, which relies on contracting internal diaphragms, this will move around the body fluid and with it oxygen taken in from the atmosphere. The main crux of the issue is, however, is that this fluid quickly runs out of oxygen depending on the levels in the air. So the intake portion of the insects gets like plenty of oxygen. The other end of their body may not receive as much, or it's extremely lowered because it's already been used. This open circulatory system was massively inefficient, and as a result, the body size of the animal is largely tied to the oxygen in the air. Along with this means neurologically, an insect's brain is exceedingly primitive by human standards. To run a larger brain properly and perfuse it with oxygen, you would need a closed circulatory system, which is what larger animals use at this point, and it can deliver a fair amount of oxygen to all parts of the body equally, allowing for the atmosphere's composition fluctuations to not have as massive of an impact on your body so radically. Now, there will be changes. For instance, I believe it's people who live, I can't remember their name, they're in Peru, they're on the top of that, or maybe it's Chile. It's basically that mountain range out there. They have 2 to 3 times the amount of red blood cells as human beings down near the surface, as far as the ocean is concerned. And it's because they have to properly perfuse their muscle. So humans living up there, more red blood cells. Humans living down here, less red blood cells. But if you were to actually go up there and stay for a while, your body would compensate and you would create more red blood cells. Just like if they were to come down, they would actually lose red blood cells. But it's interesting to see your body can kind of adapt to lower oxygen levels given enough time. But with insects, they don't really have this ability to do that. I mean, even with our own closed circulatory system, it's not a perfect arrangement. Obviously, humans can suffocate still if the atmosphere composition changes too radically. But the point is, due to an open circulatory system, this led to everything from massive spiders to 6-foot or 2-meter long centipedes to drastically reduce in size now, given the current oxygen levels. And this also caused intelligence to never really crop up beyond just pure survival, at least in the arachnid class. So something about this spider, considering we know it to not be native to Earth, is quite different. So the next morning, Charlotte then keeps talking about spiders, but Ethan and the mom are way too busy, which makes her angry as she walks off. Ethan is concerned about how he may have messed up by erasing the eyes in the picture. They talk about her original dad, and it turns out the dude lives super close and is in fact not living in Thailand. Which, why was he living in Thailand? Heather is talking to publications while Ethan continues drawing as everyone hears a yell. The aunt has found her parrot, and that thing is plucked. She tells Ethan to call Frank, as Frank rightly deduces it looks like it was trying to get frisky with a blender. The parrot attempted to squeeze through the bars to escape whatever got into its cage. Finding some blood in the vents, he then opens it up and checks it out. Like a real Chad, completely unwavered in his resolve to destroy the arachnid menace, he throws a bug bomb in the vent in an enclosed building with everyone home who's there because of an ice storm, and everyone's breathing that in. Yeah, I don't think that should cause any issues at all. So Frank is now on a mission to exterminate whatever did this. Charlotte watches cat videos as a spider makes a noise. It can mimic any noise that it hears, and it just mimicked a cat. A mothball then rolls near the jar as the spider freaks out. Touching it to the web, the mothball immediately melts it, but the spider tries to escape as the jar almost falls off, but Charlotte managed to catch it before it breaks. Looking at the spider, it's a lot bigger than it was. As she begins to learn more about spiders, Frank continues to do his work, and he starts tapping on the fish tank. The man is actually studying a fish's ability to regrow pancreatic beta cells, which, full stop. So you know we're gonna have to discuss that now, because this actually has real world implications. Pancreatic beta cells in humans, or really any animal, are critical to glucose homeostasis. These cells are located within the pancreas, obviously, and release insulin and are reactive to glucose levels. In a normal, healthy human, this keeps your levels just where they need to be, but let's say you're like type 1 diabetic, typically what happens is, for one reason or another, whether it is genetic or an injury, or potentially even a virus infecting those cells and then your body destroying those cells, in the process you will lose the ability to properly release insulin, making you reliant on insulin shots for the rest of your life. Now clearly, this presents an issue, because if for any reason these shots become unavailable, or I don't know, some rodent buys rights to it and then raises the price of insulin to almost unobtainable levels because they have insurance. Oh, wait a minute. Is insurance denying claims now because it's too expensive? Why are we paying for insurance? Okay, look, it's the upper echelon fighting for money, specifically your money. I know I need to get off the soapbox on this one, but good Lord, it is abhorrent to watch. Anyhow, the point is that if this becomes unavailable for any particular reason, those people are screwed. So you're just kind of stuck on insulin for the rest of your life. Zebrafish are known to actually regrow these beta cells all throughout their life. And if we can genetically find out why this is the case, then we can look at our own DNA and potentially turn back on these genes within the pancreas, which will then regrow these beta cells, allowing a person to naturally recover. Now, there is some regenerative ability in humans when they are younger, but it's exceedingly limited in adults. The key is to fixing this, and zebrafish may actually show us how even in adults, we can cause our cells to regrow themselves. So Frank then clears the apartment as Heather weirdly goes to check on Ethan, and then she like puts her finger up when he tries to say something. Like, why did you interrupt in the first place? I don't like you, Heather. And it's just simply because of what Heather does. Frank then enters Charlotte's room, seeing the spider drawings as he checks the vent. Charlotte then comes in, seeing him, and says Sting won't like him spraying in there. Frank says spiders don't make good pets because they don't have the capacity to love and they don't have vocal cords. See, I was on Frank's side at the beginning, but then he incorrectly states that cats only have half an ability to love. Wrongo! Professor Furface is a Chad when it comes to love. Dr. Mambo? I don't know, he's a little bit of a weirdo. So, showing the spider to Frank, he then shines a light on it as it scuttles at him. Gah! Charlotte then says, he doesn't like you. And then Guter then yells about how Frank is charging too much, and she says she'll only pay half and that's all. Pretty sure you just get sued for that. So Frank gets stiffed on the price as then he hears something in the vent but just says screw it and leaves. As Guter then tells Ethan he should be doing this, which I'm not sure about that one over there, gal. You're in New York. They probably have regulations upon regulations about why you can't, I don't know, fart in your bathroom or something without paying a tax. So as the ice storm continues to ice storm, the spider is taking over the jar. Charlotte gives the spider another cockroach as she must get more with the spider whistling that it wants more. So that night, as Ave Maria plays from Maria's apartment no less, the jar has been broken out of again. As Sting makes its way down the vents, it passes by Maria's apartment, seeing the chihuahua. Maria then kicks the dog out in the hallway for some reason, I guess because she's hammered off sangria. No, wait, that makes sense now. So the spider is in her cabinet as she starts popping those pillies. As, oh God, the spider is on her. This is like my nightmare. So she starts looking at the picture and then crying because, you know, that's kind of what you do when your whole family is gone. Also, look at the Photoshop on this picture. It is terrible. So the spider is on the backside of that thing as it comes up and then jumps on her face, biting her. Ouchies. So she starts bleeding, like a lot for that type of injury, and then heading into the bathroom, she sees her bite is almost instantly necrosing. As she starts throwing up, she then passes out, or at least for a moment, falls backwards and smashes her neck on the bathtub, resulting in a very meaty crack, which then paralyzes her. The spider then crawls into her mouth and crawls down her throat, and at this point it appears to go to her abdomen where it slices her open. So Maria is donezo. The next morning, Charlotte then heads downstairs to buy a fish tank for her spider. She discusses the spider with Eric and how fast it's growing. He then asks if her parents know that she's here. She whistles at the spider and it mimics back. She says that's its feeding call. Eric says spiders don't have vocal cords, so this is not a spider. Charlotte then holds up a cockroach as Eric says he wants to see what the spider looks like. Eric says that he will lend a fish tank, but he needs to make sure it's the right type of environment, and then he will bring it back to her. So back upstairs, Heather then talks to Ethan about, getting a new job offer, and we get this really weird response. She's like, oh, I'm accepting a job, meaning we can get out of here and we can fix Charlotte's teeth. And then Ethan's like, well, no, her teeth are probably fine. She's like, well, I bet if it was Liam's teeth, you would have fixed it. Dude, that is your offspring too. Like, this guy is working 2 jobs to provide for his family. He's trying to connect with Charlotte as her father because her real dad doesn't want anything to do with her and he's a chode. I'm just saying, if you abandon your blood offspring, you're a chode. And Heather is like what we in the business like to call a monstrous douche. So I think Heather should probably suck a railroad spike, but while arguing, Ethan then hears a noise in the vent. Opening it up, he can hear echoes as something crawls at him. It is the Chihuahua. Grabbing the dog, he then heads downstairs to Maria's, which how did the dog get up a floor? Those vents were sheer drops in them. Also, why did Maria, again, put her dog in the hallway? Sangria, I know, but opening the door, he releases the dog back in there as he goes to investigate as to why she didn't respond to the knocking. Looking at the ground, he then spots the blood trail. Following it into the bathroom, the dog is barking at something as then he sees Maria. She is totally got and in really rough shape, so she gets hauled off in a body bag as the cop asks if she was acting strangely. I mean, maybe, but that's a little much for depression, right? The cop then asks how he got in there as Ethan tells him that he has a skeleton key, so now apparently he's suspicious. Eric then calls Ethan to tell him about Charlotte. He reports that they should not be keeping the spider in their apartment. He suspects it's a highly venomous arachnid. He thinks it's a killer, and it's some type of spider that he's never seen before. Tapping on the jar lid, the spider then drops and squares up on Ethan. Heading back home, Ethan asks when Charlotte was going to tell them about hiding this highly venomous spider. And then she's like really attached to the spider, so Charlotte has a freak out over the professor being killed off in the comics, and it's obviously because of her old man. And Ethan says, look, your dad lives across the bridge, which is like a 25-minute drive, which he refuses to see you. So Heather, or Mom of the Year as I like to call her, or Amy 2.0, my hatred has grown as I've watched this movie, has literally hid this from Charlotte up until this point. And there's always the question of like, should you tell your offspring about how crappy a parent is, or should you just let them figure it out by themselves? But if they start developing like unhealthy ideas around them, you probably need to tell them the truth. So Charlotte gets mad over this, and then Heather blames Ethan like, dog, you should have told your daughter the truth about all of this crap going on. You orchestrated this entire problem through your cowardice and muddying of the waters when it came to her own father. So the reality is, because you refused to tell her the truth, you built up this false image of who her father was in her head, preventing her from properly dealing with the unpleasantness of it, resulting in a more visceral reaction because it's all being told to her at once. To her, if he's so great, why did he abandon the family? Obviously, that would be pretty perplexing to a young one. So, see, you're getting like armchair psychologist Roanoke right now. When you refuse to be honest with your offspring, it is only because you don't want to deal with the awkwardness. It's sort of like sex ed. It's going to be awkward, but you're going to have to talk to them about it because they need to hear it from you. Otherwise, they're going to maybe hear it from some weirdo. Who knows? But it's in the same vein as telling them anything uncomfortable. Trust me, you're not doing your offspring a favor by hiding anything from them. So anyways, I seriously dislike Heather. So Eric begins feeding the spider, adding a ton of animals to its enclosure, causing it to grow larger and larger. Back to biologist Roanoke. Anybody who clicked off is not going to see this. I don't blame you for clicking off during that tirade. Everybody else who stayed, appreciate you listening to my nonsense. Because of the spider's rapid growth and the intelligence seen thus far, we can assume a few things. First, its internal biology. This species appears to have a version of indeterminate growth. This means the longer it is alive and the more food that it eats, the larger it will grow. You can see this trait in like snakes, goldfish, crocodiles, sharks, but more to the point, you can see it in lobsters. Lobsters are closely related to insects, which are not arachnids, but in the same vein, so to speak. Because of this growth, it would clearly put it in violation of an open circulatory system. It would mean that it does, in fact, have a closed circulatory system if its body operates in a similar way to the species here. And given that it can function at our oxygen levels that it is breathing in, and it's not metabolizing dinitrogen or N2. And I'm saying that right now because nitrogen with nitrogen is triple bonded, and that would take way too much energy, more so than it would get back with any type of metabolism. And this means it would need to transport oxygen more efficiently around its body. And this says many things about what sort of organs it has as well and what level of intelligence it can reach. Given its ability to mimic several different animals and recreate the noises that it hears, this would mean its brain would be quite complex and beyond just a standard species on Earth. This can only be fueled by a closed circulatory system, as the oxygen requirements would be more than what an open circulatory system could handle. And this would also mean it would need something like lungs and a heart in order to properly perfuse its blood and effectively move it around the body. All of this comes from its xenobiology, but the question is, what would its own world look like? Well, we'll get to that in a moment as we see something kind of interesting with its blood here soon. So later that night, Ethan then wakes up seeing that he thought there was a spider there. Charlotte reads a comic about Fangirl where evidently Ethan wrote in there about him being called Dad, and that night as everyone goes to bed, Eric sleeps with his door open like a serial killer as the spider has outgrown its tank already. That is not a good sign. It then breaks through that thing pretty much immediately as Heather brushes Helga's hair. Gunter then comes in to check on them as her cat looks exactly like her. Down in the boiler room, Ethan then gets a call from Sandy saying the pages just aren't coming in fast enough, so they're going to have another person start working on the pages as well, which means basically Ethan is being kind of let go. Gunter comes in and then relieves Ethan of his job also, saying that he is weak and that in this family, when the times get tough, the men just walk out and she's just helping him out the door. Wow, Gunter blows. I guess it really does run in the family. Actually, truth be told, from the top down, this family is completely mid. So later that night, Gunter then tries to find her cat, but it's gone as Helga continues to knit with Gunter hearing meowing noises. She then heads out into the super dark hallway for some reason, like what is the deal with that, as then she calls out for her cat. Seeing the vent open, she then checks on it and then starts hearing meowing further back. Seeing the potted plant that scares her, she then goes down to get onto the vent level, as she can hear it in there, but then when she goes inside, yeah, operation cannot possibly go wrong, engage. Her flashlight shuts off because she knows that the spider is close and that the asteroid cluster ran by Earth. Lighting a match, it's the spider, which means it probably ate her cat. Dr. Mambo, no! Gunter is then dragged to the trash chute and then hung up. Back in the apartment, Heather is laughing along with Charlotte as a dog is barking as Ethan is kind of having a moment and he's about to snap. Yeah, it turns out you can't just completely treat somebody like crap the entire time, make everything their fault, and then everything's just good. Yeehaw. So he punches a TV, which may have been a little much, arguably, as Charlotte then grabs Liam, which was apparently the bane of her existence earlier, but now she's like super close with him. As Heather then asks what happened. I think ape mode is what just happened. So Heather then says Ethan needs some help, which, nah girl, you need some parenting classes. Actually, round them up, this whole family needs help. She then tells Ethan that he's losing them. Probably because you're also pushing him away with your bullshit. Oh god, that was a bad one. So as the spider is over Charlotte, it then crawls in as Heather says she can't do this again. The spider then knocks out Ethan and Heather, biting them both. Being paralyzed, Heather gets dragged off first, followed by Ethan. The dog keeps barking as Charlotte walks past Ethan but can't hear him because she's got her headphones on. Sponsored by No, it's not. She then gets the food ready for the dog as she literally misses everything happening. The dog keeps barking as she puts her boots over the baby. Dude. Teenagers, you know. Realizing something is up, she then takes off her headphones as Ethan gets dragged into the air vent. So you're probably wondering, Roanoke, how does a spider's venom actually work? Well, first thing to understand about the venom is it impacts actual neurons. In your body, you have specific nerve lines that we will call the motor neurons. These neurons are responsible for conducting the signal to contract muscle. When injected by venom, there are several different ways in which the venom neutralizes the prey's ability to move. First, ion channel toxins, known as neurotoxins, will prevent depolarization of the nerve, which will completely stop a signal from moving to the next neuron. This is accomplished by a nerve opening the sodium channel, forcing sodium into the extracellular space, utilizing ATP, making it less negatively charged compared to the environment, which then allows for the membrane to become less negative functionally, that then fires the neuron. Now, this is where we get into the next stage of envenomation. Since the sodium channels are blocked by this neurotransmitter toxin, it shouldn't be able to fire the motor neuron. However, some of the venom will also enter the synaptic gap, blocking the receptors from being able to uptake the neurotransmitters, also preventing the next neuron from properly being signaled. This takes place on both sides of the synaptic gap, with the presynaptic toxins preventing neurotransmitters from even exiting the neuron, and the postsynaptic gap being prevented from uptaking the neurotransmitters. This process will absolutely paralyze your body, but hilariously, you will still feel everything. However, the body is not just going to be like, oh, I guess this is life now. While this is affecting the neurons, the waste removal system of your body will be working triple overtime to remove the toxin from itself so that it can fire the neurons again properly. And this is some downtime, however, because it's going to take your body a minute to get rid of all this crap. And this is why these spider bites and then leaves the prey for a while that we see, and it may be back on its home planet. This waste removal process is slower or non-existent in the neurons, so its prey can kind of just be stuck indefinitely until it comes back. In humans, however, eventually the neurotoxin wears off and we can move again. Realizing everyone's gone, Charlotte then misses Ethan being dragged into the vent as he's spun up in a web. Charlotte realizes the Wi-Fi is out, which is her biggest concern, as Ethan starts getting strung up. Looking up, he then sees a spider crawl off. With all the doors and windows locked, Charlotte can only escape through the vents. She hears the dog enter the vent along with a spider whistling at her, which gets like crawling at her at a high rate of speed, which no thanks. She pushes the bookshelf in front of it, freaking out, as the spider already is above the baby. Turning around, she sees it has grabbed Liam and then pulled him into the vent. She calls out to Sting, who doesn't really care because, I mean, it might view you as its mother maybe, but it sure doesn't really view you or view anything else like caring about it. Who cares? So grabbing a knife, she then doubles up on these sweaters, wearing the one that Helga made her as she gets mothball juice ready. Entering the vents, lock and loading Brides of Christ, she begins crawling through to find Sting. Finding Dr. Mambo, no! The cat is strung up, which are sad times. How the Chihuahua survives like all of this is beyond me. Back in the trash chute, Gunter then begins making noises, but neither can speak. As they look down, the spider then crawls up and pulls her down. Charlotte continues her search of the vents, breaking into Eric's apartment, finding the glass tank is broken. Looking for Eric, she finds him stuck to the ceiling, but he's still alive up there, I'm pretty sure. Entering her grandmother's room, Charlotte asks if Helga has seen anything scary recently, and she says that there was this black dog that would run from her when she tried to pet it, realizing the mothballs are the key to it all. Charlotte then covers herself in mothball juice and then heads out, finding evidence that pretty much everyone in this building has been got. Ethan then bangs on the wall, hurting his hand as she opens the trash chute, having hurt him. The venom appears to be wearing off somewhat at this point, and we now see Frank has shown up. Charlotte uses the mothball juice to release Ethan from his webbing, and the reason is, in mothballs, it's called naphthalene, I'm pretty sure. It's actually fairly corrosive, which makes sense why it would melt webs. Mothballs typically sublimate from a solid to a gas, producing a toxic fume to actually most insects. Ethan then makes his way around the chute as he hears Liam. Looking up, it's literally here's Johnny. The spider was mimicking the noise, and it's running straight at them. Charlotte gets knocked out, and Ethan only has half of his nervous system working. Sting then begins coming after Charlotte, but I'm pretty sure she would smell like mothball water, so it shouldn't do anything, right? So as the spider approaches, Ethan then drops mothball fluid on it, burning it as it retreats up the trash chute as Charlotte has a nice cry. Ethan tells Charlotte it's not her fault, which I mean, like objectively speaking, it kind of is her fault, I guess. I mean, maybe that spider would have gotten a good foothold in the place, maybe not. Maybe it would have been smashed, I don't know. So Frank gets dropped down the chute next as Charlotte says it's Sting. Frank runs off to try to help Helga or escape, I'm not really sure, as Charlotte says they are trapped, with Frank asking for the key. Charlotte says the mothball water hurt the spider, as Frank pulls out his nail gun saying, I'm just gonna take shots at it because this is really gonna hurt it. However, in taking those pot shots, the sprinklers come on, washing away all the mothball juice, which, I mean, I'm gonna tell you, Frank is reaching levels of Isaac Clarke with the nail gun that shouldn't even be possible. So Sting begins bleeding blue, which interestingly, this type of blood puts it in line with a certain species of arthropod. And this would be a copper-based blood known as hemocyanin. This copper, while less efficient at carrying oxygen, is still quite capable of doing so, and this would mean that potentially this species could be somewhat aquatic, which obviously would make the indeterminate growth quite useful because the bigger you get, the harder you are to eat. So as Charlotte realizes the water is washing off the mothball juice, Frank gets grabbed and then brought up to the vent where, good lord, I don't know, his head explodes or something. Ethan then tells Charlotte to get in the garbage compactor as then he jumps in and finds Heather and Liam in there, which, wow, that was lucky. So using the last of the mothball juice, he frees them both. So now they hug it out as one family, and nothing bonds a family quite like shared trauma. What's the saying I've come up with on this channel? Guaranteed to be the best 3 weeks of your life. So as they hear the spider approach, Ethan holds the controller as the spider begins crawling. He hits the button, but it's become unplugged. Breaking through, Charlotte then holds back the spider with some sort of metal long enough for him to reconnect the plug, but he gets shocked, and I'm guessing bro's heart stops? Charlotte then crushes the spider as the spider lets out one last mimic, and then is totally donezo. Heather then pulls Ethan out. It's called CPR apparently. And if you're really desperate, a cardiac thump, which if you're interested in what a cardiac thump is, essentially in a dire situation, because you should just be focused on CPR and getting more qualified people to come help, you can take your balled up fist, and if you strike somebody in the chest hard enough over their heart, occasionally this can jolt the heart into restarting. Now, just do CPR. I'm talking like if you're out in the woods and obviously they're not resuscitating and you're doing CPR, you can't just do that forever. So cardiac thump may be a good way to go. But if you're like in a city or something, just keep doing CPR. That'll perfuse everything adequately until better help arrives. So performing the world's worst CPR, Charlotte then closes her eyes and counts to 3, as evidently that works. I have no idea what they were referencing in the movie. Like, that was never mentioned about being anything. I wonder if it was just like a cut piece of the movie.
I got you, homie.
But what's even more surprising is Heather's horrific CPR worked. So they say they love each other, as then she calls him dad, but then he's like, no, that jackass is 25 minutes away. No, he didn't say that. However, eggs have already been laid, which means this species produces asexually, which is not ideal, but thus concludes Sting. Also, the dog survived in the credits. Why not Dr. Mambo? So this species appears to hail from a world where oxygen levels are not too dissimilar from our own. This is evident based on the circulatory system it must possess, and the hemocyanin it possesses as well within its blood, which actually transports the oxygen. Given this is a passing asteroid band, it is likely that this world that they hail from ended up being hit by something that knocked off either a chunk of the crust or like a bunch of the water, or maybe the planet was even destroyed. It could be everything. Either way, the crust contained some of the water as well, which then broke off into orbit and then drifted away from there. By happen chance, some of the eggs in that crust or in the ocean, which may have protected it from the radiation of the galaxy once it froze over beyond their own solar system's heliosphere, this is what allowed the spiders to survive. Upon landing into the relatively more temperate environment of winter in New York, it was able to emerge from the egg to a very habitable environment. At this point, a major issue would be this species establishing a foothold on our world. But the biggest thing is once humanity took notice, the reality is, like with any other animal that we don't want in our environment, we could pretty much eradicate it once we put our minds to it. However, prior to that, the problem would affect quite a few ecosystems, which would not be great for the native fauna of this planet. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave me a like, would be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Roanoke Games, and Tails channel link, as well as like merch in the comments. Speaking of merch, I have new merch. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our Astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys. Next, I'd like to thank our scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, and Virix Hellstrom. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I thank you. You guys are absolute ballers. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.